In 1961, I spent an entire summer in Africa, in Kenya, mostly in Kenya. I grew up that summer.
How old were you?
19. I've had two transformative experiences in growing up. One was Crossroads and the other was Duke Law School. Until then, I was mostly a kid. When I was a sophomore at Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, we had a speaker come to campus named James Robinson, who was a Presbyterian minister and a African American who had founded an organization called Crossroads Africa, and that it turned out to be a predecessor of the Peace Corps, but it was different from the Peace Corps in that it was, the whole idea was to send American college students to Africa to work in work camps with Africans, and the object was to gain some understanding between the Africans and the Americans on the theory that there's a certain communication that passes between the guy on the pick and the guy on the shovel. I mean, the work camps were strictly physical labor. And right after I heard him speak, I called my parents and said, I want to go to Africa this summer. And my dad said, oh, that sounds wonderful. My mom said, oh, no. Eventually, my dad brought my mom around, and they supported the enterprise. And I applied, and not only was I accepted, I was assigned to the Operation Crossroads Africa pilot project to East Africa. We were the first group that had gone to East Africa. There were like, I think there were 3 summers before I went that Crossroads had been operating in West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, those places. And it was an incredible experience. We started at the National Cathedral in Washington, and we spent a week staying in the dormitories at the school at the National Cathedral, being told a little bit about what kind of an experience we were getting into. And ever since then, I've been especially fond of the National Cathedral.
What did you know about Africa before then?
Nothing. Literally nothing. It was an entirely new experience, but I knew it would be an adventure. And it was. And then after, and there were, I believe there were 240 students being trained. I came up with that number because I think there were 2 planes loads of us that were loaded up at the end of this first week. They put 120 American college kids on a super Constellation, which is a 4-engine, 3 vertical stabilizer airplane that held 60 people in ordinary commercial service. But in a 2x2 seating, well, they had 3x3 seating, and it was really close together. I managed to get myself a seat on the aisle, and the reason I wanted a seat on the aisle was almost as soon as we'd taken off, this was the days when you could visit the cockpit. I spent most of the flight up in the cockpit and there were 3 crew members. There was a pilot and a co-pilot and a flight engineer. Now the flight engineer was a busy boy keeping the engines in sync, but the pilot and the co-pilot really had very little to do. Basically, they called New York once every half hour and told them where they were, and that was it. Otherwise, they just flew the airplane flew itself. And so we entertained ourselves with with taking blips on the radar screen and making nickel bets as to whether it was a ship or a cloud. And it was from Washington to the Azores was 12 hours, and during that 12 hours, the water ran out, the food ran out, and the johns filled up. We got to the Azores, and they spent an hour cleaning up the airplane, resupplying it, refueling it, put us back on the airplane, another 12 hours from the Azores to Lagos, Nigeria. We spent 3 days in Lagos, Nigeria, and I learned that Lagos was the friendliest town on the planet. The Yoruba people of southwestern Nigeria are just amazingly friendly. And I walked by myself through the streets of Lagos, which at that time were mostly dirt streets with a ditch running down the middle that carried the sewage. I mean, that's what it was like. And I became like a Pied Piper. The kids were playing in the streets, and I would make friends with them and pick them up and throw them in the air, and they thought I was wonderful, and they followed me around the streets of Lagos.
We'll get to this when we do the backstory, but was this the first time you'd ever been out of the country?
Yes. Yes. Oh, except for Canada.
Okay. Counts, but hardly. So landing, I don't know if it was day or night, in Lagos, Nigeria, suddenly
By then it was the next day.
the next day, you're in a place that does not look anything like the United States of America.
Absolutely. Totally different.
How'd that impact you?
I loved it. Being with entirely different people. I mean, I was 19 years old and an explorer. I was ready to learn and I was ready to take in new experiences. And they told us about how the food would be very different. I thought, all right, so the food's going to be different. And when we arrived in Lagos, after 25 hours of travel, I was a hungry 19-year-old, and they pretty quickly took us to I don't know what it was exactly, but it was kind of a large room big enough for 120 American college kids, and well, it was 120 people. There were also our advisors, but I sat down. They put a plate of what I thought it looked like spinach. And I took a nice, healthy bite of this stuff. My eyes watered. My sinuses cleared. What can I tell you? It was the hottest, most spicy piece of food I had ever encountered. And so I didn't eat it. After 3 days in Lagos, they took the 17 of us, plus our advisor. We had an African-American fellow who was a professor at Emory University, was our advisor. He was a wonderful man. And they loaded the 18 of us onto a regular Ethiopian Airlines DC-6B. Now this is, again, a prop plane. It took 17 hours to get from Lagos to Nairobi with intermediate stops at Khartoum and Addis Ababa. So again, it was quite a trip. I remember again, I went up to the cockpit. I asked the pilots how they were navigating. And I said, well, if Radio Khartoum is on the air, then the radio compass will take us right to Khartoum, no problem. But it's frequently not on the air, so we just fly east. And if the river is small, we go north. If the river is large, we go south.
The river being the Nile?
The river being the Nile, and The White Nile is only 10% of the water in the Nile, so it's much smaller. And, and it's the desert, so there's never any clouds. No, it worked just fine. And then eventually we got to Nairobi, and here's 17 American college kids, male, female, black, white. We landed in British colonial Kenya, where mixing the races was not done. And we were so unusual, and somehow somebody had explained to the press that we were coming. They met us at the airport, lined us up on one of those stairs that goes up to the airplane like they used to use, took our picture, and we were on the front page of the Nairobi paper the next day. And our first work camp was in downtown Nairobi. Basically, it was excavation. And we would have crowds of 400 or 500 people watching us because they'd never seen a white man work, let alone a white woman. We had a couple of very attractive young ladies, and they were game for this enterprise. And I did not do a lot of the work because I was the only member of our group that had the foresight to get myself an international driver's license. So I became the driver for the group. And there were endless errands that had to be run to keep our camp supplied with food and soda pop and paperwork that had to be done at the embassy. And it was just, so I spent a good part of the summer driving around Nairobi. I got to know Nairobi fairly well.
And before that, you've been driving in the United States.
Oh, yes.
But did it, when you thought, oh, maybe I'll just get an international driver's license, did it occur to you that driving in the United States and driving in Nairobi, Kenya would be two different things?
It did occur to me that we probably would be driving on the left-hand side of the road. And I did not have any trouble driving on the left-hand side of the road because I was always thinking about it. I was always thinking about, be sure you're on the left-hand side of the road. Remember, you're going to go around the roundabouts to the left, not the right. And then when I got back to the United States, I said, well, I'll just drive on maybe go back to being the one. I found myself driving down the left-hand side of the road. Unfortunately, it was a deserted road.
But it takes a certain kind of 19-year-old kid to go to a foreign country, never been out of the U.S. except Canada, and think, oh, I can drive here. The summer before, I had worked on a moving van and taken a brand, in those days, Gerstenslagers built custom-built bodies for trucks. And I got assigned to drive a brand new moving van to New York City. And if you can drive a 40-foot straight truck without a right-hand rear view mirror around New York City, okay,
you get you have the impression you can drive any place. And I did. I never had an accident. I frequently we'd have just lots of us. We had trucks and buses and pickup trucks, and we kept getting assigned different vehicles. And whatever the vehicle was, I had to learn to drive it. At one point, I was told that there was a bus at a church in someplace in Nairobi that was our next vehicle. And somebody took me to that place, dropped me off at the vehicle, gave me the keys, and left me. And it took me about a half an hour to figure out how to drive it. I couldn't find the starter. It turned out the starter was under the accelerator, and you had to push the accelerator all the way to the floor, and that would start the car or the bus.
So the experience of not being part of the excavation crews, but this guy that runs all over Nairobi in different vehicles, must have been way more transformative for you than it was for the people with the pickaxe.
I think so. It was it was wonderful. and the and after the work camp in Nairobi, we had a week of, literally it was a vacation. The whole group went to Uganda, and we spent a week in Kampala. And while we were in Kampala, two of the girls and I did the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. We went and rented a 14-foot sailboat and went sailing around hippopotamus that were feeding on the bottom of Lake Victoria. And we had no idea that hippopotamus are the most vicious animals in Africa. So,
did you experience any of their viciousness?
No. They were feeding on the bottom of the lake. I don't know, the lake may be 10 feet deep, 15 feet deep. They go down, they come back up, take a breath, go back down. If one had come up under the sailboat, I wouldn't be here to tell you the tale. So, and then we went to our second work camp in Naivasha, Kenya, on the shores of Lake Naivasha in the Rift Valley. And we camped in tents, and in the area where we were, there were all the animals of Africa. And we saw a fair number of them. And we went to various game parks and saw the African animals, which is the greatest sight on the planet. One of the experiences I had when we were in Nairobi, we called our leader the coach. He had an accent, and the OA combination came out OA, so we called him the coach. And we were scheduled to fly Ethiopian Airlines back to Lagos when we went home. But we discovered that there was a BOAC jet, one of the comets, that flew from Nairobi to Lagos, and was much quicker and didn't have any intermediate stops. And we thought that sounded wonderful. And the cost was about the same, so we went to Ethiopian Airlines, and we turned in our tickets and told them we'd like to have a refund. And they were very upset because 17 people going clear across Africa apparently was a lot of business. And they said, tell you what, if you'll stay with us, we will put you up in Addis Ababa for 4 days and get you an audience with Haile Selassie the king. And we said, well, now that's a horse of another color. And we talked to the group, and we all decided that we could stand flying on the DC-6B if we got to stay for 4 days in Addis Ababa. And eventually that's what we did. But in Lake Naivasha and Lake Nakuru, two lakes in the Rift Valley of Kenya, have about 90% of the flamingos on the planet. The lakes are literally pink with all these flamingos. And in that work camp, we were frequently visited by the Maasai, who could not speak, who spoke Maasai. That's all they spoke. The Africans in our group were mostly Kikuyu or Luo, and they had no idea how to speak Maasai. The Maasai could not speak Swahili, So all communication had to be done by gesture. And I managed to communicate with one of the Maasai well enough that I ended up with this, which is a Maasai hunting knife. That's what they use to hunt lions.
And how did you, what sort of communication resulted in you getting?
Well, I
that
pointed,
gift?
I pointed at this thing hanging out from underneath his robe and indicated I was interested in it. And at this point, I forget what I gave him in exchange. I think he was willing to take hard money. He wanted nothing to do with paper money. But I think I had some shillings in hard currency, and I gave him the hard currency. But after I did this, others started doing the same thing.
I bet.
And the great moment was we had this beautiful 6-foot blonde in our group, and she wanted to trade for one of these knives, and there was a Maasai warrior group standing there, and she saw one of these hanging out from under his robe, and she lifted his robe to point at the knife, and he had nothing on underneath, and she stepped back, shocked, and he went, "Well, look at this." And I mean, talk about clashing cultures. Oh, and then U.S. News and World Report had an article while we were there that said "Terror in Kenya." That was the headline. And the byline was Nakuru. Nakuru was 30 miles away from Naivasha. And our parents all knew that's where we were. And we started getting these letters from our parents. The only way to communicate was letters. Airmail that took 4 or 5 days to get from one place to the other. And our parents were frantic because of this article. And we saw nothing. There was no evidence anywhere that we had seen. Nobody was saying anything about anything terrifying. Just, it wasn't happening. One other experience I had that was interesting. One evening, some of the Americans, some of the Africans decided to go to a dance. I knew nothing about what this was or where we were going, and the group turned out to be all black except me. Black Americans, black Kenyans, and everybody else at the dance was black. And of course, the American girls were perfectly happy to dance with me. But I started asking, shyness is not one of my characteristics. And I started asking the African ladies to dance. And I kept getting turned down cold. And then a couple of the African guys took me aside and said, "David, those girls are never going to dance with you because they don't want any of the African guys thinking that they like white guys." All right. So I experienced pure racism with me as the victim, which makes the problems caused by racism came right home. And then when I returned to the United States, I decided that I really did not like going to a college that had only men. And so I went to work and did what had to be done in order to transfer to the College of Worcester. And Howard Lowry, having been a very good friend of our families, it really was a rather easy process.
But what was it that about that experience that made you not want to just be with men?
I'd been in a group with some very nice young ladies, and I thought having ladies for friends, nothing romantic happened, but for just having ladies as friends was really a nice thing. And you just could not do that at a men's college. The opportunities to interact with women were very stilted, very unnatural. Mm-hmm. And I arrived at the College of Worcester, and Jeannie Robinson, I think, had her eye out for me, because my mom had told me that she'd talked to Jeannie and she met me before I met her, because she was working in the play at registration. You had to pick up your meal ticket, your ticket that identified you for, and told you which dining room you're going to live in, eat in, which shift, and so, unbeknownst to me, she's looking out for me, and she sees me when I'm signing up for my meal ticket. I don't know who she is. I do not remember how we became acquainted, but we ended up pretty quickly. We were boyfriend, girlfriend, and to this day, I'm pretty sure it was all her fault. Of course, she was a very attractive, very lovely young lady, and so.
And how did she know to look out for young Dave Noble?
She and my mother had a conversation. You know, my parents were involved with the College of Worcester in all sorts of ways, and I think my mother was an advisor to her. They didn't call them sororities. They had clubs that were like sororities. I think my mother was an advisor to that group, and my mother, being my mother, probably said something about her son was coming to the college, and my brother at that time was a freshman at the college. I transferred in as a junior, and Dick, Howard Lowry captured Dick. When my brother Dick, as a senior in high school, he was a straight A student. He took chemistry and math at the College of Worcester and did well in those courses. He was president of the student body and all-state end in football, offense and defense. Dick played 60-minute football. So as you might imagine, he was recruited just a wee bit. But he discovered that those courses in math and chemistry would not transfer because he was not a registered student at the college. He was just taking those courses because Howard Lowry allowed him to do it. Now, at the College of Worcester, he was going to get what amounted to a full semester's credit. So he did the right thing and went to College of Worcester, played football for 2 years, and his third year, he was president of the student body and then was a Rhodes Scholar.
Not bad.
Not bad. Not bad. And, you know, and to have a younger brother who's that much smarter is just, and athletic, just not good. But so I arrive at the College of Worcester and I'm assigned a faculty advisor in the history department because I had taken mostly history courses. I was planning to major in history. And I'm assigned as a faculty advisor, Floyd Watts. And Floyd, serendipitously, Floyd was preparing to teach African history the next year. And all of a sudden he has an advisee who has just spent an entire summer in Africa and been to several of the countries that he's going to be teaching about. And so our advisee, and he was assigned to, and it was not serendipitous, he was assigned to me because I was going to do some Kenyan history as my independent study project. So it was a natural fit. And I helped him prepare to teach the African history course, and then I took it.
Bet you did pretty well.
I did very well. That's one way to get ahead in the world. And then I did not, when I went to college, I was going to be a physician because I enjoyed biology in high school. Well, I couldn't remember the parts of a fetal pig in freshman biology, and it became clear to me that being a physician did not fit my talents.
Why did you want to be a physician?
When I was in high school, somehow it came to me I really liked helping people with their problems, and that I wanted to find a way to help people with their problems. And I thought being a doctor would be an entree to do that.
Did it occur to you there were other ways to help people with problems?
Not at that moment. And frankly, it did not occur to me all through college. I was casting about to find something to do. And at some point it occurred to me that being a superintendent of schools might be a worthy profession. And so the summer between my and I needed some extra credits. A few of my credits at Wesleyan had not transferred to Worcester. So I needed some extra credits. And so Jeannie and I decided to go to the University of Wisconsin for the summer and take education courses. And our thinking was that if I went to graduate school, maybe she would teach school. And we went to Wisconsin because Wisconsin was the library at the University of Wisconsin was a repository of English colonial history, colonial documents. And so the things that I wanted for my independent study were at the library at the University of Wisconsin. So we signed up for education courses, and Jeannie took at least one more course than I did because I wanted to spend time in the library, and I did. And by the end of the summer, I had done all my research for my independent study. And
because you knew you weren't going to be able to get back, and there was no
right.
internet that you were going to use.
No, it was do it now and no copy machines. Yeah, the copy machines came right after that. It would have been so handy to have been able to copy some of these things, but I had to take notes. And it was a lovely summer, but.
So I gather, I mean, we talked about Jeannie figuring out how to get connected to you, and that stuck.
Oh, it did. It very much stuck. I mean, we became engaged sometime in our senior year. But we were boyfriend, girlfriend from literally the beginning of my career at the College of Worcester. And actually got married at the end of exams and went on our honeymoon during what they call senior week and came back just in time for graduation.
As husband and wife.
As husband and wife. And then I spent, well, by the middle of my senior year, I still did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I thought going to law school. Several people urged me to go to law school because I was on the debate team. My debate coach urged me, a friend of mine in the registrar's office urged me to go to law school. So I started looking into law school, and I was told that Duke Law School was very compatible with Worcester students, and at least one Worcester student had gone there for the last 10 years and they'd all done well. And so I was interested in Duke, and somehow I became interested in Yale and Georgetown. So between semesters, that Christmas, my parents gave me a Volkswagen, really as a graduation present, and a wedding present, because we were planning Jeannie, by then Jeannie and I were planning a wedding. And I took that brand new Volkswagen, and a friend of mine wanted to visit Yale and Georgetown, and he lived in Washington. And somehow we found a girl who wanted to go home for between semesters who lived in Philadelphia. And right after a morning exam, the three of us jumped in my Volkswagen and took off in a snowstorm and drove the length of the Pennsylvania Turnpike without ever seeing the road. Using the guardrail in the middle, to find where the road was. And that Volkswagen was incredible in snow. And the next morning, my friend and I got up really early. We left this gal's house. We had told her this is what we were going to do. Really early in the morning, and drove up to New Haven and visited New Haven. I think we had 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning appointments. So we must have been up pretty early. And it was clear to me that Yale Law School was not where I wanted to go.
Why?
It was very cold. There was nothing friendly about it. Then there were some personal questions I had. One was, I said, do you have any way to help my wife get a teaching job? No. Do you have any help about housing? Nope, that's your problem. And the same turned out to be true at Georgetown. After our appointment at Yale, my friend and I drove to Washington and stayed overnight at his house. The next day we visited Georgetown Law School, and they were equally cold. And then my friend was not interested in Duke, but I was. And I had like a 10 o'clock in the morning appointment at Duke. And somehow I made that 10 o'clock appointment again in a snowstorm, leaving Washington. I must have left Washington like 4 o'clock in the morning to drive to Duke. And I drove down to Duke in a snowstorm, got there in time for my 10 o'clock appointment with the dean. I told him my wife wanted to teach school. Did he have any suggestions? He said yes, and reached in his drawer and pulls out a sheet and says, here's all the contact information for the superintendents of all the schools within 25 miles of Durham. And I said, well, and we're going to need a place for us to live. And he said, well, just down the hill, we've got some brand new married student housing for graduate students. So that's where Jeannie and I lived.